The upgrade that I can't afford I want to look at today relates to bodywork. Specifically, it's a fairing, the upper and lower fairing, a petrol tank and the mudguards. Now a few years ago I read in, I think it was Motorcycle Monthly or More Bikes They Are Now, they had an article about what the ideal number of motorcycles it is to own, and they came up with the equation N+1, where N is the number of bikes you already own. In other words, you always want one more bike than you've got. I have one bike, but I'd like two. I'd like a summer bike and a winter bike. If I had two bikes, I would probably want three, and if that was the case, I'd want a show-off bike, a nice customised bike, something that's a bit special. I'm thinking of the Fowlers VE Day Commemorative Speedmaster, which is gorgeous. They did do a video of it, I'll put a link in the description. But it's a lovely bike, even had girder forks. It is the most wonderful commemorative military bike that I've seen. But the reality is, of course, I can't afford more than one bike, so one bike has to do it all. I need to make my bike an all-year-round bike. In fact, I need it to be like our 2007 Ford Fiesta. It was an all-year-rounder when it came from the factory. It's never had anything done to it. We use it all the year, and it's been doing a fine job for 16 years. However, that's not the case with motorbikes, because motorbikes need winterising. This is because of the dreadful corrosion they suffer. I get very angry about this, but that's a whole other video for another day. For now, we're looking at bodywork modifications which winterising requires. To start with, we're looking at the upper and the lower fairing. For the Triumph Speedmaster, for a good size fairing, there are effectively 0 options. Triumph do offer a screen, which I've got, but if you want more protection, say from a fairing, Triumph offer nothing, and apparently neither does anybody else. If you compare that to Harley-Davidson, well, there are a gazillion options. Harley-Davidson themselves, of course, offer fairings for the big tourers. They offer a multitude of screens that you can choose from. There are any number of bodywork options, but for a Triumph Speedmaster, there's effectively nothing. So for Triumph Speedmaster owners, what are your options? Well, first there's fabrication. You need to be a fiberglass moulding expert if you're going to do this, though, and not many of us are. It's a difficult process, it's expensive, potentially dangerous because fiberglass dust is very dangerous. It's just not practical for the ordinary biker to fabricate his own fiberglass parts unless you happen to be an expert. There is one other option, and there's a universal fairing that's available. It's offered for pretty much every sort of bike. I think it comes from the Far East. I have had a look at it, and it looks like it's dreadful quality. Cosmetically, it's utterly horrible, and I'm not sure if it would offer any weather protection above dubious, and weather protection for me is the killer app for a fairing. So practically speaking, there's really only one choice for your average Speedmaster owner. You've got to modify an existing fairing. I think the easiest way would be to buy an aftermarket one, specifically a Memphis Shades Batwing, because they're good quality. Memphis Shades are synonymous with Harley-Davidson, but they do offer some fairings for Japanese bikes and a lot of fairings for Indians as well. There is a good range from Memphis Shades. The quality is excellent. I've got a Memphis Shade screen and it's superb. And they have a really good quick release system called a trigger lock. It means for me, for instance, I've already got a screen that I had from my Sportster, and I ordered it with the trigger lock mounts. If you look at the ARH custom website here in Britain, there are literally dozens and dozens of trigger locks available there, between £150 and £200, but I've already got it in stock, so that's a great incentive for me, and I really hope I'll be able to sort out a fairing for my bike at some point. Adapting a Memphis Shade screen to fit a Triumph Speedmaster is no small thing. A Triumph Speedmaster is not a Harley Sportster and it's not a Glide, and in fact, while I've been looking into this for some considerable time, more than a year, I've only ever found one person who's actually done it, and that's Lewis, who goes by the moniker of El Pipetto on the Triumph Rat forums and on YouTube as well. I have tried to contact Lewis, but he hasn't been active on the forums for many years, and he doesn't seem to use his YouTube channel very much. But if you're watching, Lewis, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to quote what you said. And you said this back on the 19th of September in 2019. The Memphis Shade Batwing model is MEM7081. The trigger lock is MEB8967. You have to cut the inner headlight surround from the Batwing. The surround is conical in shape and is too small to fit the front of the headlight. The brackets need to be bent. Easier if you have a workbench and a vise. I don't, so I had to use a £10 hammer. Lol. I bought the 6.5 and the 9-inch spoiler windshields, but both created buffeting, so I ended up getting the regular 12-inch windshield. I'm not too thrilled about the looks of the super tall shield, but it works. So Lewis shows us that it can be done, and from the pictures it does look good when it is done. So that was on the 19th of September, Lewis wrote that. On the 10th of October, bizarrely, he says he sold his Speedmaster and bought a Tiger 1200. I believe he now rides a BMW GS. Go figure. So at the end of the day, it is possible, but it is a little bit difficult and it is expensive. Now a fairing is going to be about £300. The trigger lock system to mount it, that's about £150, and the screen to go on top, that's about £100. So it's £550 all in, plus of course carriage, and you may want to paint it. If you live in Britain, you can go to ARH Custom in Blackpool. They stock the Memphis Shade stuff. But the important thing, says Lewis, is that it works. And the trigger lock system means that if I bought it, for instance, I could put the fairing on my bike in the winter, and then take it off in the spring and the autumn and use the screen, and in the summer I could remove it altogether. That, again, tremendous incentive. I really hope to be able to do that in the future at some point. Now, fairing lowers. In fact, that's even worse than the main fairing. There are no Speedmaster specific options at all. The lower part of the fairing protect the lower legs and the feet, and in cold, wet weather that is a tremendous bonus and something I really, really want. Again, you've only got two options. You've got to adapt an existing set or fabricate some from scratch. And as we said, fabricating fiberglass, it's not practical unless you happen to be an expert. I have looked at this, and to my surprise there are several fiberglass fabrication companies about the place, but you do have to travel further to get there, which would add to the expense, and I think it would make it more complicated. Plus, if you were designing fairing lowers from scratch using CAD software, I think this is going to get very expensive. Unless you're a specialist or an expert in fiberglass fabrication, I don't think DIY is an option, and I suspect that's most motorcyclists. This means, of course, the only viable option is adaptation, taking an existing set of fairing lowers and adjusting them to fit a Speedmaster. Practically speaking, the only options here are Harley-Davidson and Indian. This is because all other manufacturers seem to make fairing lowers fit the fairing uppers. They flow as one complete piece. They look very nice, but they're certainly only fit for one job. The Harley-Davidson and Indian fairing lowers are completely separate, and you can chop them up and do whatever you might need to do. Now, from the factory, Harley-Davidson and Indian fairing lowers are colour matched to the bike. They're very expensive, £800 to £1,000, although Harley offers soft lowers and they fit with Velcro and poppers over the crash bars. A very cost-effective solution. There are some aftermarket options as well, for instance Hogworks and Motia Craft Ride, who also offer soft lowers, but all these options they mount directly onto the front crash bars. Harley crash bars, they stick out a long way. It means there's plenty of room to get your leg and your foot behind them to maintain protection. Triumph crash bars, unfortunately, are narrow. I think in terms of impact protection they'd be useless. I think they'd only protect the front of the engine. I don't even think they protect the cases, because I think the cases stick out a little bit further. But there are aftermarket crash bars available for the Speedmaster, but most of them are smaller and some of them are quite oddly shaped, like the Hepco and Becker ones, although these do seem like they'd be more effective for impact protection because they stick out a little bit further. I have the standard Triumph crash bars on my bike, and I have slightly further forward reach footrests. When I hit the brake, I find the instep of my foot touches the outside of the crash bars. It means that my feet are outside the crash bars. There'd be no impact protection for sure, but there'd be no weather protection. If I did have fairing lowers mounted, my feet would be the wrong side. They would be out in the elements. The bottom line is that fairing lowers, they simply won't fit the Speedmaster. That means adapting an existing set, wherever you got them, it would be a big job. and I think you'd also need to custom make or modify the existing Triumph crash bars because they're just not wide enough. The next bodywork upgrade that I can't afford is a petrol tank. Now the standard petrol tank is 12 litres or 2.6 imperial gallons. The tank range of 150 miles or so, it's not enough. A bigger tank is required. To my surprise, there are loads of tank fabricators about the place. I think whatever town you live in Great Britain, you would be near someone who makes petrol tanks for bikes. Who knew? The cost isn't exorbitant, £500 to £1,000 depending. Petrol tanks for classic Triumphs and Nortons and BSAs and so on, everybody seems to stock those or make those, but for modern liquid-cooled Bonnevilles, there are none, typically. If you compare that to, of course, Harley-Davidson, well, there are a gazillion options for Harley-Davidsons of all sorts. Everybody seems to make a tank that'll fit a Harley-Davidson. The most impressive or prestigious option for me for the Speedmaster seems to be the Wonderkind tank. This seems to be very good quality. It's very large, 16.8 litres or 3.7 gallons, and it looks really, really good, even on the bobber, which in 2018 when it came out had a tiny tank, but this big Wonderkind tank, it looks great on a bobber and would look brilliant on a Speedmaster. The only downside really is the expense. It's hugely costly. They advertise it at €1,700, but you'd also have to pay import duties and then you get it painted. It's a £2,500 option, whatever you choose. It is wonderful, but in terms of urgent upgrades I can't afford, this is probably the most expensive. The last upgrade I can't afford relates to mudguards. I have a thing about mudguards. It seems that nowadays nearly all bikes have pathetically small mudguards. What's the point? They don't guard against anything, let alone mud. The Speedmaster mudguards, well, they're nice to look at, they're metal, they have a good centre ridge, but they're too short and narrow. Mud and crud from the road, it gets blasted all over the bike and the rider. If we compare that to some of the old Harleys, oh, they're gorgeous. Look at this, 2016 twin cam, it's a deluxe. These mudguards are perfect. Notice that they're long, so spray wouldn't be thrown up from the tyres. They wrap right around the tyre. They would be wonderful. If we compare the deluxe front mudguard to the Speedmaster front mudguard, well, there's no comparison. The deluxe mudguard is utterly sumptuous. But if we're talking mudguards, we've got to look at the Indian. The new Roadmaster 2023, ooh, this is gorgeous. It looks flamboyant, doesn't it? It's iconic. It's everything a mudguard should be, surely. But why do we stop there? Let's go back a bit. Why don't we look at the irresistible 1945 Indian Chief? Ooh, this is beautiful. These mudguards are effective. They're magnificent. These are what mudguards should be. They're wonderful, fully valanced mudguards. Or fenders. Mudguards. Whatever. As Freddie says, nothing really matters to me here because these are all urgent upgrades I can't afford.